Someone forgot the keys mates for an easy siege. The first major Chinese battle of World War II occurred in Shanghai. Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek wanted to open up a second front against the Japanese and take the pressure off their northern advances. Shanghai seemed like an ideal location, and Chiang committed his best troops to the fight. After months of heavy fighting and trench warfare that often resembled that of World War I, the Japanese landed 2 naval invasions that flanked the city. In headlong retreat, the Chinese soldiers looked forward to the defenses and relative rest behind what is called the Chinese Hindenburg Line. These were a series of fortifications designed to provide a defense in depth. Yet, the speed of the Japanese advance was so swift, Chinese officials with the keys to these fortifications had also fled. The resulting chaos meant that Chinese units couldn't establish strong positions, and Japanese troops quickly flanked Chinese units, forcing them to retreat. The series of forts designed to produce a stalemate with the Japanese was breached in less than 2 weeks. A combination of Japanese skill and Chinese ineptitude led to the premature end of this siege. Death from above. German paratroopers. The Germans in World War II are known for their ruthless panzer attacks fast and coming from nowhere. These tanks won many a battle for the Nazis. They also employed paratroopers with often stunning results. When attacking Holland, the Germans landed paratroopers at the pivotal Fort Emael. This was considered the biggest and strongest fortress in the world at the time. They landed on the roof of what otherwise seemed like a formidable defensive position. They disabled the armaments and quickly captured the fort. This removed an important avenue for a flank attack against German panzers. They also landed on the pivotal Maas Bridge, Moerdijk bridges, at the Rotterdam airport, and at the Dutch capital of The Hague and its airfields. The surprise attack led the enemy to believe that German troops were everywhere at once, and the resistance fighters soon surrendered. The paratroopers caused an extreme panic, and historians consider this tactic a masterpiece of military maneuvering and siege warfare to this day. No way out, no way in, no problem, Smedly, Butler says charge. The Marines in Haiti had to fight rather dirty and inglorious small wars for years on end. As part of the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, they were employed in various Latin America and Caribbean countries to put down rebellions that might invite the intervention of European powers. Smedly, Butler, and the Marines were a force deployed in Haiti for almost 15 years, who often faced incredibly stiff fighting. In 1915, while pursuing a group called the Caco, the Marines suddenly found themselves surrounded. 44 Marines on patrol were suddenly surrounded by 700 of the Caco. During the night, the Marines maintained a perimeter while under siege, and in the morning, instead of remaining in place and being overrun, they charged from 3 different directions. After a great deal of fighting, they had chased the bandits back to one old French fortress. Smedly had turned the tables, and now the castle and Caco were under siege. Taking their knives and supposedly carrying them in their mouths like pirates, Smedly led Marines into the fortress. After 20 minutes of hand-to-hand combat, they had killed over 50 Caco while suffering only 1 casualty. Smedly was such a crazy genius that he not only won the fight, but was awarded his 2nd Medal of Honor for his leadership. Blowing it or blowing it, Battle of the Crater. By 1864, Civil War Southern General Robert E. Lee had won a string of victories, but several important defeats had left him in a besieged position south of Richmond, Va. Much like their medieval counterparts, the Union soldiers tried to end the siege by blowing a hole in the Confederate line. They lobbed cannon fire at the enemy, and the resulting explosion crippled the Confederate line. The Confederates were so stunned it took them 15 minutes to even react. But the Union failed to properly act on their newfound advantage. They had careful plans, but the presence of black soldiers leading the exploitation force led to some behind-the-scenes posturing that undermined the attack. General Meade ordered the assault commander, General Burnside, not to use black soldiers. This was explained as a way to avoid undue casualties that would make it seem like they put the expendable soldiers in front, or the racist belief that black soldiers weren't up to the task. The soldiers sent in to replace the vanguard ended up going into the blast crater instead of around it and were easily contained by enemy fire. This was nearly a siege done right, but the Union generals blew it big time. Mound of bones and a butchered brother. The Mongols and their horseback-riding warriors swept across the steppes of Asia and Europe and conquered more of the ancient world than any other civilization. But they were also capable of holding long sieges against their enemies. For example, when invading South China, they relied heavily upon siege warfare. The siege of the Xianyang and Fancheng were an epic contest that lasted years during the late 13th century. And the eventual fall of these cities would seal the fate of the southern Song Empire. These were pivotal cities with a strong defensive position in the Han River Valley. Xianyang was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and a river on the 4th. Fancheng connected to its sister city with a bridge and also used the river for natural defense. During the siege, the Mongols employed Muslim engineers to create massive trebuchets. They used the trebuchets to launch large stones at Chinese forces, but the Chinese had set up large nets to prevent the boulders from causing too much damage. The Mongols then employed their large fleet to prevent the Chinese from getting supplies via the river. Through many battles, the Mongols managed to destroy the bridge that linked Xianyang to Fancheng. Their cavalry force and navy defeated multiple relief efforts sent by the Song dynasty. Finally, after much bloodshed, the Mongols conquered the more exposed city of Fancheng. The Mongols piled the corpses of the defeated almost 10,000 people way up high and left them in full view of the remaining defenders in Xianyang. The Mongols most prominently displayed the body of Fancheng's garrison commander. Like much of Chinese history, a small number of military families supplied much of the senior Chinese leadership, which meant the dead commander's brother was left defending the city of Xianyang. While the strong leaders were inured to many hardships, the military families had many disagreements and had become alienated from the court. Moreover, the Mongols had effectively destroyed almost every relief force, so by 1273, no reinforcements had arrived. The prominent display of dead bodies combined with the alienation from the court. Break-in via the toilets. Even toilets had a role in the end of sieges. The medieval castle had many strengths that made them natural political, military, and administrative centers. They were usually on high ground, built with stone and on stone to prevent fire attacks and underground sapping. And moats prevented siege engines from getting close enough to break down doors or breach walls. All that protection, castles still had to get rid of a lot of human waste. Outside of the small, private chamber for the castle lord and his family, the common toilet was a small room on the edge of the battlements. It jutted out from the castle, and had a hole that let the fecal matter drop into a moat or cesspool. This gave the attacking army a small hole, pun intended, through which they could infiltrate a castle. In some sieges, an enemy commander might choose an intrepid climber to try and squeeze through the opening. And in some cases, the plan worked. A small group could infiltrate a castle in the dead of night and open the gates for their fellow soldiers. Empty threats lead to a clever and ruthless trap. Empress Matilda and King Stephen lived in 12th century England and were both related to Henry I. When Henry died, Matilda and Stephen dragged the country into a civil war as they vied for the crown. Some local noblemen, like John Marshall, found it difficult to stay on the right and winning side of the conflict. This is how Marshall found one of his castles under siege. King Stephen had captured Marshall's son and threatened to kill him if Marshall didn't give up the castle. The king threatened at various times to launch his son into the castle using a catapult, but reportedly couldn't follow through with the plan because of the sweet precociousness of the child, William Marshall. At a later siege, John Marshall invited these enemies to peace discussions under a sacred flag of truce. The gate through which they entered had both an outer gate and inner gate leading to the courtyard. After his enemies cleared the first gate, Marshall closed it behind them. His men suddenly flooded the room and killed the trapped men. Killing under a sacred banner didn't exactly help Marshall's reputation, but the necessities of military warfare justified just about any maneuver. Or maybe John Marshall was just crazy enough to win a siege.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the support and likes and comments down below, and also thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to see you in the next video. Then take care.